The morning sun barely touched the dusty streets of Millfield when Eleanor opened her eyes to another day of worry. The small mining town had seen better days, and so had she. At 23 years old, Eleanor had grown used to the whispers that followed her wherever she went. The women at the market would stop talking when she walked by, then start again once they thought she couldn't hear. "Poor thing," they would say. "Such a shame about her size. No man will ever want her," another would add with a shake of her. Head out to Eleanor had heard it all before. She knew what they thought of her. In a town where most women were married by 20, she was still living with her sick mother, struggling to make ends meet. Her father had died in the mines 3 years ago, leaving them with nothing but debt and sorrow. The small wooden house they called home was falling apart. The roof leaked when it rained, and the windows had cracks that let in the cold winter air. Eleanor had tried to fix what she could with her own hands, but there was only so much she could do with no money for proper repairs. Her mother, Helen, lay in bed most days now. The cough that had started small had grown into something much worse. Eleanor knew her mother needed medicine, but the doctor wanted payment up front. They had already sold everything valuable they owned, her grandmother's jewelry, her father's tools, even the good china that had been in the family for generations. "Eleanor," her mother called weakly from the bedroom. Eleanor put down the letter she had been reading, another bill they couldn't pay, and hurried to her mother's side. Helen looked pale and tired, her breathing shallow and difficult. "Mama, what do you need?" Eleanor asked, taking her mother's thin hand in hers. "I'm worried about you, dear," Helen whispered. "What will happen to you when I'm gone?" "Don't talk like that," Eleanor said, though she knew her mother was getting worse each day. "You're going to get better. We'll find a way to get you the medicine you need." Helen squeezed her daughter's hand. "You're a good girl, Eleanor. Too good for this place, but I fear what will become of you." Eleanor forced a smile. "I can take care of myself, Mama. I always have." But even as she said the words, Eleanor felt the weight of their situation pressing down on her. The debt collectors had been coming around more often. Just yesterday, Mr. Peterson from the general store had told her they couldn't buy anything else on credit. The landlord, Mr. Williams, had given them until the end of the month to pay the rent they owed, or they would be thrown out onto the street. That afternoon, Eleanor's Uncle Robert came to visit. Robert was her father's brother, but unlike her father, he had never worked in the mines. Instead, he made his living in ways that weren't always honest. Eleanor had never trusted him, and his sudden concern for their welfare made her nervous. "Eleanor," Robert said, settling his large frame into their one good chair, "we need to talk." "What about, Uncle Robert?" Robert looked around the shabby room and shook his head. "Look at this place. Look at your mother. You can't go on like this." "We're managing," Eleanor said, though they both knew it wasn't true. "No, you're not," Robert said firmly. "The bills are piling up. Your mother needs expensive medicine. The landlord wants his money. Face facts, girl. You need help." Eleanor crossed her arms. "What kind of help?" Robert leaned forward, his eyes glinting, in a way that made Eleanor uncomfortable. "I've been talking to some people in town. There's a way out of this mess." "What way?" "There's a merchant from the next town over. Rich fellow named Mr. Blackwood. He's looking for a wife." Eleanor felt her stomach drop. "A wife?" "Now before you say no, hear me out," Robert said quickly. "He's willing to pay off all your debts, your mother's medical bills, the rent, everything. All he wants in return is a wife to keep his house and maybe give him children someday." "You're talking about selling me," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't think of it like that," Robert said, waving his hand. "Think of it as a business arrangement, a marriage of convenience. Plenty of people do it." Eleanor stood up, her hands shaking with anger. "Get out." "Now, Eleanor, be reasonable." "Get out," she shouted. "I won't be sold like a piece of livestock." Robert's face hardened. "You think you have a choice here? Look around you. Your mother is dying. You're about to lose this house. You have no money, no prospects, and let's be honest, no other options for marriage. This might be the only chance you get." The words hit Eleanor like a slap. She knew Robert was cruel, but hearing him say out loud what she had feared in her heart made her feel sick. "Mr. Blackwood isn't a young man," Robert continued, "but he's not unkind. He just wants a quiet wife who will take care of his home. You could do worse." "Have you met this man?" Eleanor asked. Robert shifted uncomfortably. "Well, not exactly met him, but I've heard good things." "You've heard good things," Eleanor repeated, "about a man you want me to marry, a man you've never even met. He's offering good money, Eleanor. Enough to solve all your problems." Eleanor felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "And what does he know about me?" Robert looked away. "He knows you're available." "Available," Eleanor said bitterly, "like something on a shelf in a store." "Don't be dramatic," Robert said. "This is how the world works. Women marry for security, men marry for companionship. It's practical." Eleanor walked to the window and looked out at the dusty street. A group of children were playing outside, laughing and carefree. She remembered being that age when her biggest worry was finishing her chores in time to play with her friends. When had life become so complicated and cruel? "What if I say no?" she asked without turning around. Robert was quiet for a moment. "Then you and your mother will be on the street by next week. And when your mother dies, and she will die without proper medical care, you'll be alone with nowhere to go. Is that what you want?" Eleanor closed her eyes. She thought about her mother lying weak in the next room, struggling to breathe. She thought about the pile of unpaid bills on the kitchen table. She thought about the whispers and stares she endured every day in town. Maybe Robert was right. Maybe this was her only chance. "How much?" she asked quietly. "Enough to pay everything you owe and get your mother the best medical care available." Eleanor turned around. "I want to think about it." Robert stood up. "Don't think too long. Mr. Blackwood won't wait forever. He's already agreed to meet with you this Saturday in the town square. If you don't show up, he'll find someone else." After Robert left, Eleanor sat beside her mother's bed. Helen was sleeping, but her breathing was labored and painful to hear. "What should I do, Mama?" Eleanor whispered to the sleeping woman. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She walked around the small house, looking at everything with new eyes. The faded curtains her mother had sewn when Eleanor was a child. The wooden table where they had shared so many meals. The chair where her father used to sit and tell stories about his day in the mines. Would she really have to give all this up? Leave her mother and go live with a stranger? Become a wife to a man she had never met, who saw her as a solution to a problem rather than a person worth loving? Eleanor went to her small mirror and looked at herself. She saw a round face with kind eyes and brown hair that never seemed to stay in place properly. She saw the body that made the town women whisper and shake their heads. She saw a woman who had never been courted, never been kissed, never been told she was beautiful. Maybe Robert was right. Maybe this was the best she could hope for. The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety and doubt. Eleanor tried to care for her mother, but her mind kept wandering to Saturday and the meeting in the town square. She imagined what Mr. Blackwood would look like, what he would say when he saw her. Would he change his mind? Would he decide she wasn't worth the money he had offered? Friday night, Eleanor sat with her mother and told her about Robert's proposal. Helen listened in silence, her eyes growing sad. "Oh, my dear child," she said finally. "I never wanted this for you." "It might not be so bad, Mama," Eleanor said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "At least you'll be able to get the medicine you need." Helen reached out and touched her daughter's face. "You deserve to be loved, Eleanor. Really loved. Not bought like a horse at market." Eleanor felt the tears she had been holding back finally spill over. "But who would love me, Mama? Look at me. I'm not pretty like the other girls. I'm not small and delicate. I'm just me." "You are beautiful," Helen said firmly. "You are kind and smart and strong. Any man would be lucky to have you. Choose him." But this isn't choosing. This is settling. And you deserve so much more than settling. Maybe deserving something and getting it are two different things, Eleanor said sadly. Saturday morning came too soon. Eleanor put on her best dress, a simple blue one that her mother had made for her 2 years ago. It was plain but clean, and it was the nicest thing she owned. She brushed her hair and pinned it back, trying to look presentable for a man who was considering buying her. The town square was busy with the usual Saturday market. People were buying vegetables and meat, children were running between the stalls, and everyone seemed to be enjoying the warm morning. Eleanor stood near the old fountain in the center of the square, feeling like she was watching life from the outside. She saw Robert approaching with a tall, thin man in expensive clothes. The man had gray hair and sharp features, and he was looking. Thomas McAllister had been loading supplies onto his wagon when he first noticed the strange meeting happening near the fountain. As the mine foreman, he knew most people in Millfield, and he recognized Eleanor standing there looking uncomfortable. He also recognized the nervous energy of Robert, Eleanor's uncle, and the calculating stare of the well-dressed stranger. Something about the scene bothered him. Thomas had seen enough business deals in his 35 years to know when money was changing hands, but this felt different. This felt wrong. Thomas was a big man, with calloused hands and dirt under his fingernails from years of working in the mines. He had started as a regular miner when he was 16, but his honest nature and hard work had earned him respect. Now he supervised the other miners and managed the day-to-day operations of the mine. He was known throughout Millfield as a fair man who kept his word. He had been married once to a sweet woman named Mary, who had died of fever 3 winters ago. Since then, he had thrown himself into his work, finding comfort in the routine of mining and the camaraderie of the men who worked under him. He lived alone in a sturdy house he had built with his own hands, and most people assumed he would never marry again. But watching Eleanor in the town square, Thomas felt something stir inside him that had been quiet for a long time. Not romantic feelings, he barely knew the girl, but something more basic. A sense that someone needed help, and he was in a position to give it. Thomas had noticed Eleanor around town before. She was hard to miss, not because of her size, which the cruel townspeople whispered about, but because of the way she carried herself. Despite the obvious hardships she faced, she always walked with her head up. She was always kind to the children who ran around the market, and he had seen her helping elderly neighbors with their heavy packages. What bothered Thomas most was the way she was being treated now. He could see from across the square that she was uncomfortable. Her shoulders were tense, her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, and she kept glancing around as if looking for an escape route. The stranger, Mr. Blackwood, Thomas had heard someone call him, was circling Eleanor like a buyer examining a horse. He would step closer, look her up and down, then step back and whisper something to Robert. Eleanor's face grew redder with each whispered comment. Thomas remembered his younger sister, Catherine, who had died 10 years ago. Catherine had been forced into a marriage with a man twice her age because their father had gambling debts. The man had been cruel to her, and Catherine had died young and unhappy, far from home and family. Thomas had never forgiven himself for not doing more to help her. He wouldn't let the same thing happen to Eleanor. Thomas set down the supplies he had been loading and walked across the square. As he got closer, he could hear pieces of the conversation. "She's healthy enough," Mr. Blackwood was saying to Robert. "Can she cook, clean, handle household duties?" "Oh, yes," Robert replied eagerly. "She's been taking care of her sick mother for years. Very capable around the house. And you're certain about her situation?" Mr. Blackwood asked with a meaningful look. Robert nodded quickly. Completely untouched. Never been courted by anyone. Thomas felt his anger rising. They were talking about Eleanor like she was livestock, being sold at market. "What about children?" Mr. Blackwood continued. "I need someone who can give me sons." "She's young and strong," Robert assured him. "Perfect for bearing children." Eleanor's face had gone pale, but she stood silently through this humiliating discussion. Thomas could see tears gathering in her eyes, though she was fighting hard to keep them from falling. That was enough. Thomas stepped forward, his boots making a loud sound on the cobblestones. All three people turned to look at him. "Afternoon, Eleanor," Thomas said politely, tipping his hat to her. Then he looked at Robert and Mr. Blackwood with much less friendliness. "Gentlemen?" Robert looked nervous. He knew Thomas's reputation in town, and he probably suspected that the mine foreman wouldn't approve of what was happening. "Thomas," Robert said with forced casualness. "Just having a conversation with Mr. Blackwood here about Eleanor's future." "Is that what you call it?" Thomas asked. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. From where I was standing, it looked like something else entirely. Mr. Blackwood drew himself up to his full height, which was still several inches shorter than Thomas. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Mr. Blackwood, and I'm conducting private business here." "Thomas McAllister," Thomas replied without offering his hand. "And I don't think anything involving Eleanor should be called business." Eleanor looked up at Thomas with surprise. She had seen him around town, of course, but they had never really spoken. She knew he was respected and well-liked, but she had no idea why he was involving himself in her situation. "Now see here," Robert said, stepping forward. "This is a family matter. Eleanor's family. It has nothing to do with you." Thomas looked directly at Eleanor. "Is that true? Do you want to be here right now?" Eleanor opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had been asked so few questions about what she wanted that she didn't know how to answer. "Of course she wants to be here," Robert said quickly. "This is a wonderful opportunity for her." "I wasn't talking to you," Thomas said without taking his eyes off Eleanor. "I was talking to her." Eleanor looked around at the three men surrounding her. Robert looked angry and worried. Mr. Blackwood looked impatient and annoyed, but Thomas looked concerned, like he actually cared about her answer. Eleanor started, then stopped. She had never had anyone ask her what she wanted before. Her whole life had been about what other people needed from her. "Take your time," Thomas said gently. Mr. Blackwood huffed with irritation. "This is ridiculous. We had an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Thomas asked. Robert and Mr. Blackwood exchanged glances. Neither seemed eager to explain the details. "A marriage arrangement," Robert finally said. "Mr. Blackwood is looking for a wife and Eleanor needs security. It's practical." "Practical," Thomas repeated. He looked at Mr. Blackwood. "And what are you offering for this practical arrangement?" Mr. Blackwood straightened his expensive coat. "I don't see how that concerns you." "Humor me. I'm willing to pay the family's debts in exchange for marriage to the girl," Mr. Blackwood said stiffly. Thomas felt his jaw tighten. "Pay the debts like buying cattle." "It's a perfectly legal arrangement," Mr. Blackwood said defensively. "The girl gets security, I get a wife. Everyone benefits." "Everyone except Eleanor," Thomas said. He turned to look at her again. Eleanor was staring at the ground, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Thomas could see that she was trying not to cry. "How much?" Thomas asked suddenly. "What?" Robert said. "How much do you owe?" "All of it. Medical bills, rent, everything." Robert's eyes lit up with greed. "Well, there's quite a lot. The doctor bills alone are— I didn't ask for details, I asked for a number." Robert calculated quickly in his head. "About $400 total." Thomas nodded. It was a lot of money, more than most miners made in a year. But Thomas had been saving his wages for years, and as foreman he made more than the regular workers. He had been putting money aside with no particular purpose, just because he was practical and careful. Now he knew what he wanted to do with it. "I'll give you 500, Thomas said. The square went silent. Even the nearby shoppers seemed to stop talking. "What?" Robert said weakly. "I'll pay $500 to cover all debts," Thomas said clearly. "No strings attached, no marriage required, just to help a neighbor in need." Mr. Blackwood's face turned red with anger. "This is outrageous. We had a deal." "What deal?" Thomas asked. "Did Eleanor sign anything? Make any promises?" Mr. Blackwood looked flustered. Well, no, but then there's no deal, Thomas said firmly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather wallet. He counted out bills slowly and deliberately, making sure everyone could see the money. $500, he said, holding it out to Robert. Take it. Robert stared at the money like it was a snake that might bite him. I don't understand. What do you want in return? Nothing, Thomas said. I want nothing in return. Eleanor looked up at Thomas with shock and confusion. You can't do that, she whispered. Why can't I? Because you don't even know me. Thomas smiled at her. The first real smile she had seen from anyone in weeks. I know enough. I know you take care of your sick mother. I know you work hard to pay your bills. I know you don't deserve to be sold like property. That's enough for me. Mr. Blackwood was furious. This is interference in a private matter. I could have you arrested. Thomas turned to face him fully, and Mr. Blackwood took an involuntary step backward. Thomas wasn't a violent man, but he was big and strong, and his expression made it clear he wouldn't tolerate any more threats. For what crime? Thomas asked quietly. Helping my neighbors? Paying someone's debts? There's no law against kindness. Mr. Blackwood looked around the square and realized that people were watching. A crowd had gathered to see what was happening, and they were all listening to every word. He was a stranger in this town, while Thomas was respected and well known. This isn't over, Mr. Blackwood said to Robert. Actually, it is, Thomas said. He held the money out to Robert again. Take the money. Pay the debts. Let Eleanor go home to her mother. Monday morning came faster than Eleanor had expected. She stood outside the mine office building, her hands shaking slightly as she held a small basket containing her lunch. She had barely slept the night before, worried about starting her new job and wondering if Thomas had really meant what he said about hiring her. The mine office was a simple wooden building near the entrance to the mine itself. Eleanor could hear the sounds of men starting their workday, voices calling to each other, the clang of metal tools and the rumble of carts being moved. It was a world she had never been part of, even though her father had worked in these very mines. Thomas appeared in the doorway right at 8 o'clock, just as he had promised he would. Good morning, Eleanor, he said with a warm smile. Ready to see what we're dealing with? Eleanor nodded, still not quite believing this was really happening. Good morning, Mr. McAllister. Just Thomas, please. We're going to be working together. He led her into the office, and Eleanor's eyes widened. Papers were stacked everywhere, on the desk, on chairs, even on the floor. Some looked official, others were just scraps with numbers scribbled on them. A dusty ledger book lay open on the desk, with entries that seemed to stop and start randomly. Oh, my, Eleanor said softly. Thomas laughed, but it wasn't a mean laugh. I warned you I was terrible with paperwork. My late wife Mary used to help me keep things organized. Since she passed, well, he gestured at the mess around them. Things have gotten out of hand. Eleanor felt a pang of sympathy. She hadn't known that Thomas was a widower, but it explained the sadness she sometimes saw in his eyes. Where should we start? She asked, rolling up her sleeves. For the next hour, Thomas explained how the mine worked. He showed her the different types of records they needed to keep, how many tons of coal each crew brought up each day, what equipment needed repairs, which suppliers they bought tools from, and how much each miner was owed in wages. Eleanor listened, carefully asking questions when she didn't understand something. She had always been good with numbers. Her father had taught her arithmetic when she was young, and she had kept the household accounts for years. But this was more complex than anything she had dealt with before. The biggest problem, Thomas explained, is that I've been trying to keep track of everything in my head. But there are 43 miners working different shifts, plus all the suppliers and maintenance issues. It's too much for one person to remember. Eleanor picked up the dusty ledger book and flipped through it. This hasn't been updated in months. I kept meaning to work on it, Thomas said sheepishly. But at the end of a long day in the mine, the last thing I wanted to do was sit down with a pen and try to make sense of all these papers. Eleanor looked around the chaotic office and felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Excitement. This wasn't just busy work or charity. This was a real job with real problems that needed solving. For the first time in months, she felt useful. "I have an idea," she said. "Instead of trying to fix what's already here, what if we start fresh? Create a new system that's easier to maintain?" Thomas raised his eyebrows. "What do you mean?" Eleanor began sorting through the papers as she talked. "We could organize everything by type. Wage records here, supply orders here, equipment maintenance here. Then we create simple forms that you or the crew leaders can fill out each day. At the end of the week, I can transfer everything to the main ledger books." "That sounds, actually, possible," Thomas said with surprise. Eleanor felt a flush of pride. "It will take some time to set up, but once we have the system in place, it should only take a few hours each week to maintain." "You really think you can make sense of all this?" Eleanor looked at the scattered papers again. It was daunting, but she could already see patterns emerging. Mining operations followed regular cycles: daily production, weekly supply orders, monthly equipment inspections. It was just a matter of organizing information that was already there. "I know I can," she said with more confidence than she had felt about anything in a long time. They worked together all morning, with Eleanor sorting and Thomas explaining what each type of document was for. She found herself enjoying the work more than she had expected. It felt good to use her mind for something more challenging than household chores. Around noon, Thomas suggested they break for lunch. Eleanor had brought her simple meal of bread and cheese, but Thomas surprised her by producing a basket of food from somewhere. "Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house makes extra lunch for me most days," he explained. "There's always more than I can eat." They sat on chairs outside the office building, eating and watching the busy activity around the mine. Eleanor felt strange but not uncomfortable being in this masculine world of mining. The men who passed by were respectful to her, tipping their hats and saying good morning. "They seem nice," Eleanor observed. "They're good men," Thomas agreed. "Most of them have families to support. They work hard and deserve to be treated fairly." Eleanor noticed the way Thomas talked about the miners. Not like a boss looking down on his workers, but like someone who genuinely cared about their well-being. "How long have you been the foreman?" she asked. "About 5 years now. I started working in the mines when I was 16, same as most of these men. The previous foreman saw that I was good with people and promoted me." "Do you miss it? Working in the mines instead of managing them?" Thomas considered this. "Sometimes there's something satisfying about the physical work, about seeing exactly what you've accomplished at the end of each day. But I like being able to help the men in different ways now, making sure they're paid fairly, that the working conditions are as safe as possible." Eleanor could hear the sincerity in his voice. This wasn't someone who had taken a management position for the power or prestige. Thomas genuinely wanted to take care of the people who worked for him. After lunch, they returned to the office and continued organizing. Eleanor found herself falling into a comfortable rhythm with Thomas. He would explain what something was, and she would figure out where it belonged in their new system. When she had questions, he answered them patiently. When she made suggestions for improvements, he listened carefully and usually agreed. "You know," Thomas said around mid-afternoon, "you're really good at this." Eleanor looked up from the wage record she was organizing. "Good at what?" "All of it. Understanding the numbers, seeing how things should fit together, asking the right questions. You have a mind for business." Eleanor felt a warm glow at the compliment. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had praised her intelligence or skills. "My father always said I was quick with figures," she said, "but there was never much opportunity to use it." "Well, there is now." As the day went on, Eleanor found herself relaxing around Thomas. He was easy to talk to, and he treated her like a capable person whose opinions mattered. It was so different from how most people in town treated her. "Can I ask you something?" Eleanor said as they were finishing up for the day. "Of course." "Why did you really help me on Saturday? I mean the real reason." Thomas was quiet for a moment, organizing some papers. "I had a sister once," he said finally. "Catherine. She died young." Eleanor waited, sensing there was more to, the story. "My father owed money to some men in the next town over," Thomas continued. Gambling debts. Catherine was 17 and she was, well, she was beautiful. The kind of beautiful that makes men do foolish things. Eleanor felt her stomach tighten, guessing where this story was going. One of the men my father owed money to offered to forgive the debt if Catherine married his son. The son was older, had a reputation for being cruel to women. But my father was desperate, and Catherine was dutiful. She agreed to the marriage, to save the family. Thomas stopped organizing and looked directly at Eleanor. The man treated her terribly. She was miserable and far from home, and she died of fever 2 years later. But I always believed she died of unhappiness just as much as sickness. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. I'm so sorry. I was young then, barely 20. I told myself, there was nothing I could do, but the truth is I was scared. I didn't want to stand up to my father or challenge the arrangement. I let my sister be sacrificed for our family's debts. It wasn't your fault, Eleanor said gently. Thomas smiled sadly. Maybe not entirely. But when I saw what was happening to you on Saturday, I knew I couldn't stand by and watch again. I couldn't let another young woman be sold to pay someone else's debts. Eleanor felt a deep respect for Thomas's honesty. He could have given her a simple answer about wanting to help a neighbor. Instead, he had shared something personal and painful. Thank you, she said quietly, for telling me that, and for not letting me become another Catherine. Thomas nodded. You deserve better than that. Every woman does. As they walked home together that evening, Eleanor reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few days. Saturday morning she had been preparing to meet a man who wanted to buy her. Now she had a job, a way to support herself, and something she hadn't had in years, hope for the future. Same time tomorrow? Thomas asked when they reached her house. I'll be there, Eleanor promised. That night, Eleanor sat with her mother and told her about her first day at work. Helen listened with growing amazement as Eleanor described the 2 months after Eleanor began working at the mine office. The whispers in town started getting louder and meaner. At first, Eleanor had been so happy with her new job and her mother's improving health that she hadn't paid much attention to what people were saying, but it was getting harder to ignore. The trouble started at the general store on a Wednesday morning. Eleanor was buying supplies for the office when she overheard Mrs. Henderson talking to Mrs. Morrison behind the counter. It's not natural, Mrs. Henderson was saying in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. A young unmarried woman spending so much time alone with a man like that, especially a woman like her, Mrs. Morrison added with a sniff. She should be grateful anyone would give her work at all, instead of getting ideas above her station. Eleanor felt her cheeks burn, but she continued selecting the items she needed, pretending not to hear. Mark my words, Mrs. Henderson continued. No good will come of this arrangement. That girl has always been trouble, and now she's got her claws into poor Thomas McAllister. Eleanor couldn't pretend to ignore that. She turned around to face the two women. Excuse me, she said as politely as she could manage. Is there something you'd like to say to me directly? Mrs. Henderson had the grace to look embarrassed, but Mrs. Morrison crossed her arms defiantly. We're just concerned about the reputation of decent folks in this town, Mrs. Morrison said. Some arrangements don't look proper no matter how innocent they might be. My working relationship with Mr. McAllister is completely professional, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her anger. I keep his books and organize his office, nothing more, nothing less. That's what you say, Mrs. Morrison replied. But people talk. People wonder why a respectable widower would hire someone like you when there are plenty of other people in town who need work. Eleanor felt like she had been slapped. Someone like me? Mrs. Henderson put a warning hand on Mrs. Morrison's arm, but the other woman shook it off. You know what I mean, Mrs. Morrison said. You were about to be sold off to that merchant fellow before Thomas stepped in. Now you're working for him every day alone in that office. People are bound to wonder what's really going on. Eleanor stood there for a moment, feeling the stares of other customers in the store. She had two choices. She could slink away in shame, or she could stand up for herself. For the first time in her life, Eleanor chose to fight back. "You're right," she said clearly. "People do talk, and some people seem to have nothing better to do than spread nasty rumors about their neighbors. But I know who I am, and I know the value of the work I do. If that bothers you, that's your problem, not mine." She paid for her supplies and walked out of the store with her head held high, leaving the two women staring after her in shock. But the encounter bothered Eleanor more than she wanted to admit. That evening, she mentioned it to Thomas as they were finishing up work for the day. "People are talking," she said quietly, "about us working together." Thomas looked up from the ledger he was reviewing. "What kind of talking?" Eleanor felt her face grow warm. "They think it's improper. A unmarried woman working alone with a man." Thomas set down his pen and sighed. "I was wondering when this would start. I had hoped people would mind their own business, but I suppose that was too much to ask. Maybe I should find work somewhere else," Eleanor said, though the thought made her heart sink. She loved her job at the mine, and she couldn't imagine going back to having no purpose or independence. "Absolutely not," Thomas said firmly. "You're the best thing that's happened to this operation in years. The books are organized, the men are being paid on time, and we're actually making a profit for the first time since Mary died. I'm not going to let gossips drive you away." Eleanor felt a surge of gratitude but also worry. "But what if it hurts your reputation? You're respected in this town. I don't want to cause problems for you." Thomas looked at her seriously. "Eleanor, my reputation is based on 35 years of honest work and fair dealing. If people want to throw that away because of petty gossip, that says more about them than it does about us." Despite Thomas's reassurance, the rumors continued to grow. Eleanor noticed that some of the miners' wives who had previously been friendly to her now crossed the street to avoid her. Children who had once smiled and waved now stared at her with curious eyes, no doubt repeating things they had heard their parents say. The situation got worse when Mr. Blackwood returned to town. Eleanor was walking home from work one evening when she saw him coming out of the hotel. Her first instinct was to turn around and go a different way, but Mr. Blackwood had already seen her. "Miss Eleanor," he called, walking over to her with a cold smile. "How pleasant to see you again." Eleanor felt her heart start to race, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Mr. Blackwood, I thought you had left Millfield." "I had some business to finish here," he said, his eyes looking her up and down in the same calculating way they had months ago. "I heard you found employment with Mr. McAllister." "Yes, I work in the mine office." Mr. Blackwood's smile turned nasty. "Work? Is that what they're calling it these days?" Eleanor felt anger flare up inside her. "I don't know what you're implying." "But, oh, I think you know exactly what I'm implying," Mr. Blackwood interrupted. "A young woman, working alone with a man, spending long hours together every day. People are starting to wonder what kind of work you're really doing." "My work is completely respectable," Eleanor said through gritted teeth. "Perhaps, but it doesn't look respectable, does it? And in a small town like this, appearances matter more than truth." Eleanor started to walk away, but Mr. Blackwood stepped in front of her. "You know," he said conversationally, "my original offer still stands. I'm still looking for a wife, and despite everything that's happened, I might still be willing to consider you." Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. "After the way you talked about me in the town square? After treating me like a piece of property?" Mr. Blackwood shrugged. "Business is business, and frankly, your reputation has become somewhat tarnished since then. You might find that my offer is the best you're going to get." "I would rather die alone than marry you," Eleanor said with more venom than she had ever put into any words. Mr. Blackwood's face darkened. "That can be arranged," he said quietly. "You think Thomas McAllister is going to protect you forever? He's a businessman, just like everyone else. When the pressure gets too great, when keeping you starts to cost him more than it's worth, he'll throw you aside just like everyone else has." Eleanor pushed past him and hurried home, her hands shaking with anger and fear. Mr. Blackwood's words echoed in her head. Would Thomas really stand by her if things got difficult? She got her answer sooner than she expected. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at the office to find Thomas in heated conversation with three well-dressed men she didn't recognize. Thomas looked angry in a way she had never seen before. "Good morning," Eleanor said cautiously. Thomas turned to her with a forced smile. "Good morning, Eleanor. These gentlemen were just leaving." One of the men, a portly fellow with an expensive watch chain, looked Eleanor up and down with obvious distaste. "This is her, then? The one causing all the trouble?" "The only trouble here," Thomas said coldly, "is people who don't mind their own business." The man turned back to Thomas. "Be reasonable, McAllister. We're not trying to cause problems for you. We're trying to help you avoid them." "How generous," Thomas said sarcastically. Eleanor realized these men must be Thomas's business partners or investors. Her stomach dropped as she understood what was happening. The portly man continued, as if she wasn't there. "The mine is profitable now, more than it's been in years. But this situation with the girl is causing talk that could hurt business." "What kind of talk?" Thomas asked dangerously. A second man, tall and thin with a pinched face, spoke up. "Questions about your judgment, about whether a man who would engage in improper relationship can be trusted to run a mining operation responsibly." Eleanor felt like she was going to be sick. These men were threatening Thomas's livelihood because of her. "There is nothing improper about my relationship with Eleanor," Thomas said, his voice getting louder. "She is an employee who does excellent work." "Perhaps," the portly man said, "but it doesn't look that way to outsiders, and appearance matters in business." The third man, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. "We're not asking you to fire her exactly, just find her work somewhere else. Away from the mine. Away from you." Eleanor couldn't stand it anymore. "Maybe I should," she began. "No," Thomas said sharply, not taking his eyes off the three men. "You shouldn't anything. These gentlemen are the ones who should leave." The portly man's face reddened. "Don't be foolish, McAllister. We control the financing for this operation. If we decide you're not fit to manage it anymore, then you'll have to find someone else who can make you as much money as I do." Thomas interrupted. "Good luck with that." The men exchanged glances. Eleanor could see they hadn't expected Thomas to be so defiant. "Think about what you're risking," the thin man said. "Your position, your income, your future. And for what? For her?" Thomas walked to the office door and opened it. "Get out." The three men filed out, but not before the portly one turned back. "This isn't over, McAllister, mark our words." Eleanor arrived at the mine office the next morning with new determination. She had spent the night thinking about everything her mother had said, and she realized that running away would be just another form of giving up. She had spent too much of her life letting other people make decisions for her. Thomas was already at his desk when she came in, looking over production reports. He glanced up and smiled when he saw her. "Good morning. I wasn't sure if you'd come in today after everything. That happened yesterday." "I considered staying home," Eleanor admitted. "But then I decided I was tired of letting other people scare me away from things that mattered to me." Thomas set down his papers and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "This job matters to you?" Eleanor felt her heart speed up. This felt like an important moment, though she wasn't sure why. "Yes," she said simply. "This job matters to me. Working here matters to me. You matter to me." The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor couldn't believe she had been so bold, but she was tired of hiding her feelings. Thomas stood up slowly and walked around the desk until he was standing close to her. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "you matter to me too. Much more than just as an employee." Eleanor felt her breath catch. "Thomas, She was interrupted by angry voices outside the office. Through the window they could see a crowd gathering near the mine entrance. Some of the voices sounded familiar, but others were strange. Thomas frowned. "What's going on out there?" They went to the window and looked out. Eleanor's heart sank when she saw Mr. Blackwood in the center of the crowd, talking animatedly to a group of men and women. She could also see the 3 business partners from yesterday along with several prominent townspeople. "We should go see what this is about," Thomas said grimly. They walked outside together, and Eleanor immediately felt the hostile stares of some of the people in the crowd. Mr. Blackwood saw them coming and smiled his cold smile. "Ah, Mr. McAllister," he called out loudly, "and the lovely Miss Eleanor. How convenient that you're both here." "What do you want, Blackwood?" Thomas asked. Mr. Blackwood gestured to the crowd around him. "I've been talking to some concerned citizens about the situation here at the mine. There seems to be quite a bit of concern about the propriety of your current arrangements." Eleanor noticed that not everyone in the crowd looked hostile. Some of the miners and their wives were there, and they seemed more confused than angry. Several people she recognized as Thomas's friends were also present, looking worried. "What kind of concern?" Thomas asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. The portly businessman from yesterday stepped forward. "The kind of concern that affects the reputation of this entire operation. We've been conducting some inquiries, and it seems that public opinion is quite divided about whether this mine is being run in a morally acceptable manner." Eleanor felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she forced herself to stand tall. Mrs. Morrison pushed her way to the front of the crowd. "It's not right," she declared. "A decent man like Thomas being led astray by a woman of questionable character." "What questionable character?" Eleanor found herself saying before she could stop herself. Mrs. Morrison looked surprised that Eleanor had spoken up. "Well, everyone knows about your situation with Mr. Blackwood here, about how you were willing to sell yourself to pay your family's debts." Eleanor felt a surge of anger so strong it surprised her. For months she had let people say cruel things about her without fighting back. But something had changed. Maybe it was having meaningful work for the first time in her life. Maybe it was having Thomas's respect and friendship. Maybe it was simply that she was tired of being ashamed of things that weren't her fault. "You're absolutely right," Eleanor said loudly, her voice carrying across the crowd. "I was willing to marry a stranger to save my family from poverty and debt. Do you know why? Because when my father died in these very mines, he left us with nothing. Because when my mother got sick, we had no money for medicine. Because in this town, a woman has very few choices when she's desperate." The crowd had gone quiet, listening to her words. Eleanor continued, her voice getting stronger. "I was willing to sacrifice my own happiness to take care of my mother. Some people might call that questionable character. I call it love and loyalty." She turned to face Mr. Blackwood directly. "And you, sir, were willing to buy a wife like you might buy a horse or a cow. You talked about me like I was property, not a person. If anyone here has questionable character, it's you." Mr. Blackwood's face turned red with anger, but before he could respond, Thomas stepped forward. "Eleanor is right," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the crowd. "She was put in an impossible situation and was willing to sacrifice herself for her family. That doesn't show questionable character. It shows courage and selflessness." He looked around the crowd, meeting the eyes of people he had known for years. "I've lived in this town for most of my life," he continued. "I've worked alongside many of you, done business with you, helped you when you needed it. In all that time, have I ever given you reason to doubt my integrity?" Several people in the crowd shook their heads or called out no. "Then why are you doubting it now?" Thomas asked. "Because I hired a capable woman to help run my business? Because I refused to let gossip and prejudice drive away the best employee I've ever had?" Jake Harrison, one of the crew leaders, stepped forward. "Thomas, nobody's questioning your integrity, but people are worried about appearances." "Appearances," Thomas repeated. "Let me tell you about appearances. 3 months ago, this mine was losing money every month because I couldn't keep up with the paperwork and organization. Since Eleanor started working here, we're profitable for the first time in years. Every man working here has been paid on time every month. We've been able to afford better safety equipment and regular maintenance on the tunnels." He gestured toward Eleanor. "That's what Eleanor's work looks like. That's the reality behind your precious appearances." The portly businessman tried to regain control of the situation. "Mr. McAllister, No one is questioning Miss Eleanor's capabilities. We're simply concerned about the propriety of— The propriety of what? Thomas interrupted. A man and woman working together professionally? A woman using her intelligence and skills to earn an honest living? What exactly is improper about that? Eleanor felt a rush of gratitude and something deeper. Thomas wasn't just defending her work, he was defending her right to have work, her right to use her mind and abilities. Mr. Blackwood, seeing that the crowd was beginning to side with Thomas, tried a different approach. Perhaps, he said smoothly. The solution is simple. Miss Eleanor could avoid all this unpleasant gossip by accepting my original proposal. I'm still willing to marry her and provide for her properly. The crowd turned to look at Eleanor, waiting to see how she would respond. This was it, the moment when she could take the safe path, accept a marriage that would end all the gossip and controversy. Eleanor looked at Mr. Blackwood's cold, calculating face. Then she looked at Thomas, who was watching her with an expression of hope and fear. No, she said clearly. I will not marry you, Mr. Blackwood. I will not marry anyone who sees me as property to be bought or a problem to be solved. I deserve better than that. She turned to address the crowd directly. I know what some of you think of me. I know you. Whisper about my size, my age, my situation. But I also know what I've accomplished in the past 3 months. I've organized a business that was failing. I've helped create jobs for your husbands and sons. I've earned every penny I've been paid, through honest work and dedication. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. If that threatens you, if a woman using her mind and skills makes you uncomfortable, then that's your problem, not mine. I will not apologize for being capable. I will not apologize for wanting more from life than just waiting around for someone to rescue me. The crowd was completely silent now. Eleanor could see some people nodding in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable or angry. Thomas stepped closer to Eleanor, and when he spoke, his voice was warm with admiration. Eleanor is right, he said. She deserves better than what Mr. Blackwood is offering. She deserves better than gossip and judgment from people who don't know her. She deserves to be valued for who she is, not criticized for who she isn't. He paused, then took Eleanor's hand in front of the entire crowd. Eleanor, he said, looking directly at her, you've become the most important person in my life. Not just because of your work, though that's been invaluable, but because of your intelligence, your kindness, your strength, because of the way you face every challenge with courage and determination. Eleanor felt tears starting to form in her eyes. Was Thomas really saying what she thought he was saying? I love you, Thomas said simply. I love your quick mind and your generous heart. I love the way you see solutions where others see only problems. I love your laugh and your stubborn streak and the way you refuse to give up even when things seem impossible. Eleanor could barely breathe. Thomas, I'm not asking you to marry me because it would solve the gossip problem, Thomas continued. I'm asking you to marry me because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Because you make me want to be a better man. Because somewhere along the way I fell completely and utterly in love with you.